G'day and welcome to the Farms Advice podcast with your host, Jack Creswell. Whether you farm it, service it, or just love it, this podcast is for you. We'll bring you the techniques and technologies you can implement into your day straight from the leaders and innovators themselves. Spread the Farms Advice so that we can reach more farmers right across Australia. Follow us on all of your socials at Farms Advice, and let's get into this episode. In this episode, we'll dive into the psychology of farming and becoming a profitable farmer, diving into your mindset as the farmer, your employee's mindset, and how actually you can be farming profitable and happy at the same time, and just seeing different ways of how that has worked. Talking with Dr. Kate Burke. We've had her on previously on the podcast, very in the early stages, and we welcome her back with open arms. The way that she provides value, and we thank just her, like any other guest, for giving up their time to give value back to the Farms Advice listeners. Over 11,000 monthly listening in, so it's well worth the trip. But let's just get into this episode to see what it's all about.
Beauty. Well, welcome back to the Farms Advice studio, Dr. Kate Burke. Great to have you in, and also an author. We touched on your book earlier. When was it when you came in? Nearly 2 years ago, a year and a bit or something.
Yeah, it was December 2020. Jack,
Good.
you were in...
You know it better than me.
Yeah, you... I have a habit of remembering situations, and your situation was being in hotel quarantine in Perth at Christmas time.
Yeah, no, the beauties of coming back during COVID. But it was also a pretty good time to catch up on everything, what's going on for the podcast anyway. 2 weeks in quarantine isn't the best thing, but if you've got something to work on, it's not too bad either.
That's right. And Farms Advice has certainly evolved a lot since then. So congratulations on your career evolution, and also the evolution of Farms Advice.
Yeah, I think it's come a long way since you've been on. I think we're probably around 1,500 listeners. Now it's 11,000 a month.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And it's actually having some impact too, getting some good feedback through socials, just through a quick little survey. Have you implemented anything into your operation, your farm? And 40 people came back and said yes. So I think to get that free information across from the experts out in the paddock like yourself, drawing on inspirations, using it as motivations, or physical sort of ag tech, getting it on farm, or just an old technique, is playing a huge role. And I think it's only really at the beginning as well.
Yeah, that's great, Jack. And yeah, I think you're like me. We want people to prosper more and stress less, and that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, all about those 1%ers, get the rest of them up as well, and those probably not looking for the new information is where the podcast needs to get to. That there's only 35%, believe it or not, that listen to podcasts in agriculture. I believe that. So getting that other 70% to look for new information proves pretty vital too, I think.
Yeah. And that's probably, that makes sense, because in terms of return on investment, when you look at a set of data, usually sort of 20 to 30% are actually performing financially twice as well as the remainder. So there's this huge opportunity for the majority to, improve just a little bit and make, if they want to, and make a huge difference to their lives and to their paddocks and to their bank account.
Yeah, absolutely. And over the last couple of weeks, probably the theme of who I've been talking to have sort of suggested it all starts with mindset within farming, getting your mind right, having that time with family and everything, but also then getting into farming and taking a back seat and then coming into it and just see what you can sort of operate a little bit better. Gives you the time and the ability to have that overall view of what's going on.
Yeah. And I'd concur with that. And I guess it's a real challenge. Like, it's easy to say, harder to do.
Yeah.
And because we get, I think I talked about it last time. I sort of talk about four thinking landscapes or four mindsets that we can be in at, from time to time. I talk about them as the paddocks, and grounded is what you're describing there, where, you've got a good balance of being able to think logically, being able to get the work done and feeling satisfied. Most of us, though, are probably in our heads, and that's where we're still really productive. And often the high-performing farms that I deal with and people I deal with are in their heads because they do get everything done and they work really hard and they're constantly thinking. But they're actually quite stressed, and they are, we're giving up family time, and things like that. And, with just a few tiny tweaks, they could get the best of both worlds. And then there's the other two landscapes. The swamp is where you're not probably being as productive as you need to be, and you're also unsatisfied. And it's okay to fall into the swamp every now and then when things aren't going right. It's pretty normal, but I guess we just need to be conscious of if we're in the swamp for too long, that's where we need to reach out and perhaps get some professional assistance.
Yeah.
And then the other one that often I see a bit is what I call in the clouds, and that's where, we've convinced ourselves that everything's okay, but we're actually not that productive or profitable, but we're not seeing our view of the world's not as real as what's going on. So that might be, and often that occurs in challenging times, and not wanting to face reality or not wanting to deal with tricky issues like succession, for example.
Yeah, very tricky coming up, dealing with it ourselves as well, which gives me sort of good feedback as well to roll it out on the podcast. I think a lot of farming families are coming across that. But backstepping, how do people identify if they're up in the clouds, in the swamps, like you suggested before? Are clients coming to you when they feel overloaded or they feel like their operation's amazing when probably in reality it's not really?
Well, it comes out in conversation usually. Yeah. I think awareness is the first thing. So when I've ran workshops, one of the things I do is run a workshop called Grounded Thinking, and in that process, I talk about the landscapes, and people tend to identify when they feel, straight away once you sort of put it in plain language rather than in sort of mental health clinical language. Straight away they go, oh yeah, I've been there, or when this happens I get like this. So it's self-awareness is the start, and I guess that's a part of emotional intelligence, is understanding yourself first and how you behave. And sometimes the other thing in family discussions, like when we're starting a succession process, for example, or a strategy process, some of the conflict comes out, or just different opinions, and that's where there might be a bit of behaviour that's identified by one party that and we talk that through. So an example of that might be the dad of the operation. You've got another party coming along, and the dad's used to doing his own thing and not necessarily communicating to the rest of the family, and that might, and that when that gets talked about, you sort of, people start to realise or they become more aware of their own behaviour.
Yeah. And how does that come up in conversation though? Is it just within the family group, Dad, you're being a bit of a pain in the ass? There's a lot of probably stubborn farmers out there, everyone sort of knows, and there may be a couple tuning in, both young or old, about they actually have been on the land running their own operation for so long. How are we actually flipping that over and getting others involved in that communication to see and how we can run these operations a little bit better?
Yeah, often how it comes out, so part of how I sort of run my process is I do individual coaching sessions as well as group discussion within a business.
Yep.
And often when I'm having those individual
that's it.
You're back, Jack.
Well, it was good.
What we're doing here? Oh, she's there. Right.
There you go, mate.
You there?
Yeah, you dropped out.
Yeah, I just had to check out. It's actually our internet now, I found out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because your face froze for the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, so do you just want to pick off, start off where you left off just then, where we left off?
Yeah. Talking about family conversations. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I do family strategy or farm business strategy, one of the things I do is have individual coaching sessions as well as group discussion, and often, in a one-on-one situation, people will sort of raise their worries and their dissatisfactions, and sometimes they might be looking externally when they're chatting away, saying, oh, well, I want to do this, but dad won't let me, or mum won't let me, or oh, we just don't think the young couple are committed, and we have these sort of conversations, and then I'll put it back on the individual and say, yeah, but what's your part in this? What's your behaviour? So it's usually through directed questioning that self-awareness comes up, and then depending on the family dynamic, some families get on really well and can have pretty frank conversations that are constructive. And in that case, I sat through an amazing conversation once where they were talking about each other in front of each other, and the person who would be getting spoken about was just sitting there listening, taking it all in, not defending themselves.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty amazing sort of dynamic. Like, it was really impressive. And you can see that family, like, they're all 12 months down the track, you can see they're really working hard to be their best selves and bring their best selves into the business.
Yeah, I think probably getting around that, as the family dynamic may change over time as well, and having that communication loop open as well within the family plays an important role in that. Is that what you've seen with a few clients as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And if they can do that, without any external assistance, that's fantastic. And it sometimes for, deep reasons, and I guess generations of finding communication difficult, they can't express themselves adequately without, someone else helping them to do that. And I guess that's where the likes of myself and other facilitators come in to help that process.
Good stuff. And I actually labelled this episode to how to maximise our profits in 2022. Do you think it comes down to that communication loop, being in touch with your people, whoever it may be, employees, family, at home, on the farm, and that's where it sort of all starts?
Yeah, it does, because you've still got to get the work done.
Yeah.
So I guess, back to the premise of the book, that the way to prosper more and worry less is to be good at all three of productivity, finance, profit focused, and people, including yourself, those close to you and those you do business with, and taking control, and and not blaming others and things like that. So it does start with the people. But it's certainly also one of the people aspects is just having the motivation and the discipline to push the boundaries in difficult times to get the work done. So an example of that, I mentioned before we started, that one of the topics of conversation is footy finals around here. It's that time of year in spring, and last weekend I was heading off to the Wimmera League Grand Final, which is over at Horsham, and there was rain coming on the Saturday, and the guys that guys that were playing in the grand final were out spreading urea on Friday to get it done before the game, or spraying crops and things like that. And it would have been easy to get distracted given the events of the weekend. And it's just going to those little efforts to get things done on time that really make a difference in productivity, and which then leads on to profitability.
Yeah. And what sort of processes would you put in to improve our own time management as farmers? For those out there that are probably a bit poorer on their time management skills, it's always good to lift those ones up and look at how the top tier is sort of doing it. How are your clients, or how are the non-clients out there listening in? How could they sort of start to develop their own time management, put in some blocks just to make sure they are getting the work done, they're having time to look back on the operation as well? How's that work?
Yeah, it's
a big
hard.
one.
Yeah, it's hard, and even in my own business, I constantly find it a challenge to manage time, and I reckon managing time's probably a bit of a oxymoron, because there's only 24 hours in a day. So it's we talk about our profit limiting factors, and we talk about water. In this case, it's too much for a lot of your people and neighbours and peers and the New South Wales listeners. We talk about money, capital being a limiting factor. We talk about all these things, but often we underestimate the value of time. And I think it starts in being aware of how we use our time, and what we talk about self-awareness, and what are the profit making jobs. So is going and tidying the workshop. It helps efficiency and all those sorts of things, but tidying the workshop on a wet day versus actually sitting down and doing some number crunching on a wet day about whether you should be buying $1 million Agrifax sprayer or perhaps a $650,000 something or other. That's probably going to be better for your business in the long term than tidying the workshop. And tidying the workshop is probably a bit of a therapeutic thing, and almost like mindfulness, a bit like me. I need to tidy things up so I can think straight and work straight too. But I guess another example might be making stuff out of IBCs or shuttles on a wet day, building a new dog kennel or a new wood pile cover-upper. To me, those things are Sunday afternoon jobs. Like they're not work, they're not money-making jobs. And there is a tendency to and this is probably one of the biggest differences I see between those that are doing well financially as well as productively, is that they view office work as work.
Yeah.
Rather than this, anything inside is not work, and outside jobs are work, or workshop jobs are work. I think just having a more mature outlook about the size of the business you're running, and that it does need, some attention to detail on the numbers side of things, and being mature about that is a big game changer, I reckon.
Yeah, I think so. And I've actually had that conversation recently just to see how we can work a little bit better on our own farm. But I'd imagine right across Australia it'd be the same sort of thing playing out. As soon as it's wet in the sheds, fixing up something, working on the mechanics, welding, whatever. I was actually doing it yesterday. It was pissing down rain. And hopefully Dad was in the office doing a little bit, or himself. But what sort of tools can we look into, or how should we be working this? Is like setting up Gmail and actually blocking out. I've been looking into blocking out times where you put effort in for 2-3 hours into work outside or whatever. Should we be working to that sort of realm, or how does it work? Or should we even be doing this?
I think it comes down to the individuals, because we all have different working styles.
Yeah.
So I'm, if Linda, my business manager, listens to this, she'll get the giggles, because I'm notorious at ignoring my calendar, as you found out this morning, Jack.
Yeah.
So blocking it, I find it difficult to block out times.
Yeah.
And a lot of the farmers and families I work with are fairly intuitive, so they're probably a bit the same, that they manage their time in their head. But if you can get into the discipline of starting to use a calendar, particularly when there's multiple people in the business, I think that does help. The other thing that I've found useful in working with groups is just to help with accountability, is just using WhatsApp and having a group WhatsApp and communicating by that rather than text, so that everyone sees the messages, what's going on. So, the traditional sort of Sunday afternoon phone call, or back in the day when I was growing up, it would have been, the discussion after the Sunday roast about what needs to be done and who's doing what. You can use things like WhatsApp to improve that. And most of the people like you that have come back to the farm businesses, you are used to having some structured communication.
Yeah.
And I really think that the older your folks' generation, so my peers out in farmland, probably do need to respect that a bit more, and be willing, to give up 15 minutes on a Monday morning to have a quick discussion and keep it business-like, and leave the banter for later, and that 15 minutes will set up the rest of the week. So businesses that do that and have been doing that for years tend to get a lot done, and it becomes more efficient.
Yeah. I think if you look to plan, whatever that quote is, planning to fail, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but planning that 10 minutes each day just to plan out your day, whatever the tasks are. If there's no task, just to go make sure you're doing those maintenance jobs, or the ones that are going to make a difference. Your sheep are escaping, or doing a crop check, bug checking, whatever sort of crop you got in at that stage. Making the high profit sort of levers first off, and then going back to the drawing board after.
Yeah, and I think when there's multi-generation stuff, like the older generation will intuitively know what needs to be done, and depending on the weather in the last few days, or if they've been looking at the markets, and looking at spreads or things, or spotting spikes, they'll intuitively know where their attention needs to be.
Yeah.
The trick is communicating that and to everybody else, and actually communicating the why, and taking the time to explain, and that's sometimes where the tension can occur.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find sort of, and in most cases it's the older male feels like they're getting ganged up on a bit by, you know, their female partner and the younger generation, because they're sort of all of a sudden, they're, for the first time for probably 30 years, they're being questioned and being made accountable, and they don't like it.
Yeah, well, it is different. It's change and whatever is coming, but it's inevitable as well for the younger generation coming back to the farm and seeing how it can be run, not always better, but differently. Obviously, people don't operate the same in their own mind, and you're going to have that slight change. So stopping those sort of disagreements, I suppose, rather than having it blow up something unnecessarily about just different ways of thinking.
Yeah, and that requires a bit of respect and patience on both sides. So the older generation needs to respect that, you know, this young whippersnapper is keen and brings a skill set that's equally as important as the practical skill set that they might have or their workmen might have.
Yeah.
And it takes patience on the whippersnapper's point of view. You know, a bit of patience, tolerance, and understanding is something that one younger generation farmer who's, you know, been home quite a few years now, and who was asked in a forum, or he and his wife were asked in a forum, you know, if they could go back 10 years, you know, what would they do differently in how they sort of manage the dynamic? And he said patience, tolerance, and understanding.
Yeah.
Which is challenging because we all just want to get on with the job, and, you know, it's, and the younger you are, actually I think it works on both sides, but I was going to say the younger you are, the more right you think you are. But I suppose
I'd agree with that.
the more years you have under your belt, and the more understanding and the more seasons that you refer to, you become more sure of yourself too.
Yep.
So you've got whippersnapper over here just thinking they're right because they're, you know, the Dunning-Kruger effect of not knowing what you don't know. And then you've got old mate over here and old mum over here who have 40 years under their belt and a fair bit of wisdom, and then somewhere in the middle is the meeting point.
Do you think the older generation's probably more risk averse? They've come through droughts, floods, pouring rains, and everything in between, frost biting all their crops, and they're just sort of leveling the playing field just to manage that as well, rather than getting too far ahead of themselves. The young person comes back on farm, they're like, shit, let's go. We've got some leverage behind us. Let's go expand everything. And then, 2 years later, they may be in drought, unable to make repayments, or may not be to that grand aspect of it, but a bit smaller. Do you think that's a little bit of the case?
I see that. I see two things. Like, I see all, you know, all sorts of permutations and combinations play out, and one is the younger generation comes home, and if the business is in a pretty good spot, the older generation might be very happy to give the younger generation their head, and quite often they want to, you know, upgrade all the machinery and make things more efficient and rah. Next minute, you know, the blink of an eye, there's $2 million being spent, and there's a hell of a lot of machinery repayments, and 3 or 4 years down the track, after a few challenging seasons, you know, the net worth hasn't actually increased at all because it's all getting chewed up in depreciation and machinery payments. and then there's a bit of a light bulb moment of like, oh, okay. So that's one thing I try and help people avoid. I sort of, don't be indulgent with your kids. And then I see, the best case scenario is where you get the mix right of giving some of those new ideas a go, but at the same time being mindful of the risks, and that's where a plan can really help. And it seems to be a dirty word, business plan in some farming circles, and a plan to me doesn't need to be a 20-page fancy looking document that looks like a KPMG brochure. You can do a plan on the back of a beer box. Like, a plan's just articulating and agreeing what's important to you, what you'd like to achieve by when, and how you're going to get there. And so if that puts an order of, having a CapEx plan that works towards an ideal kit of machinery or works towards some ideal infrastructure improvements, and prioritises, say, land expansion over some of those other things, if the end game is to double the size of the farm, so 2 or 3 families can make a go of it. That can have, it's just so life-changing for people to actually articulate and put on paper where they want to be in 5 years' time.
Yeah, I think from one sentence to 20 pages, whatever it may be for your family, from the carton of beer, writing it down is probably the best thing to do. And I think it makes people excited, whether you're young or old, about a goal. The goal of your new workshop, you've just sold your fat lambs for a great price, and now you can get your workshop in, and making those timely decisions to go in with your financial year to make them a bit more timely and benefiting the business as well. I think, and that goal of improving your livestock sale, your crops yield for 22, 23, and working towards that together, you don't have, and you sort of know what you're leading to as all employees within the family as well. And as a young person, that is what gets you excited to that expansion or even optimization of your farm to improve your own production. I think that's pretty cool and needs to be done on every farm just to get people excited rather than just turning over the same thing every year. We've actually had the same income since 2000 to 2015, 2020 or whatever. But things are changing. Inflation's increased over the years as well. So probably moving that figure up as well as it goes. I'm no financial advisor or farm advisor myself, but I think that's the way it shapes up, just to get people more excited within the game.
Yeah, that's right. And you come away from a planning session, you can feel a bit exhausted, particularly if it's been one where everything's just, there's been these massive brain dumps and some tricky things to sort through. But when you cut it back to a small table that might have half a dozen priorities and goals on it, and who needs to do what, it does fire people up, and it's even more. I've sort of been in this game now 7 years, and had a meeting the other day with a family that started working with me in 2015, and to look at what they've achieved in the last 7 years, they've more than exceeded their goals. And it's really cool. It's really cool.
Once they've exceeded them, do they set new ones, or how's that work?
Yeah. So I guess things evolve. And one of the things I don't think we address or acknowledge enough when we're talking about business planning in the family context and the intergenerational context is the individual circumstances of the people within the business are still at flux quite often. So, you might be on the front foot, and Jack, you might ring me up and say, oh, look, you want to come and have a chat to us. And you might be 45 and your kids are in their early 20s, but they might not be partnered up yet, or might still have they might never partner up, or they might still have a desire to go overseas, and you're 45, so you've sort of got another 20 years left in you before you want to even slow down. So it's good to start those conversations. It's difficult when all the final circumstances, there's so many unknowns. So it's not just as simple as belting out a few business structures and creating family trusts and making sure there's a nest egg at the end and some, enough to pay for the aged care bond, and sort of pat yourselves on the back and then go back to the, day-to-day of not communicating well. It's actually trickier than that. So that's where I think annually these things need to change. And certainly where we started on that particular farm 7 years ago and how it's panning out now, I think things aren't exactly what we thought they were going to be. So the short answer to your question in terms of starting up another set of goals, it really depends on the stage. And yes, there might be new goals, but it might be, if they've been through a rapid expansion phase, the goal might just be consolidation.
I think that's an important way to put it as well. And now you've got the expansion, maybe you've landed your neighbour's block or across the road further along, and optimising that to improve that, working on your yields, getting down to sort of every hectare, every acre, how you can improve that. Whether you're from livestock, even horticulture in a shed, you just bought out a new shed. We've got a few more hort listeners as well, so we've got to adapt to what they're doing. But coming broad acre, livestock is the predominant of what the listeners in the area they come from, and just sort of utilising that just so, and also aligning that with sustainability going forward. How can you be more sustainable financially within your paddocks, environmentally, and how can those two sort of work together as well?
And that's right. And the Horty listeners know this more than anyone in terms of being cognizant to consumer expectations and social license to farm. I think that's an area where, we're talking about sort of, I guess, changing attitudes and mindsets. I think the mindset around ESG issues, so environmental, social, and governance issues of some of our family farms is an important next step. And it's not about, I guess it's about sort of having an expansive mindset rather than shutting down and being fearful. And having an accepting mindset. Like, there's no right or wrong. It's just that our mindset of the past of farmers being in one corner and everyone else being in the other corner, it's actually not a particularly helpful mindset.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's too much at risk now. Like, if you're sitting on a enterprise that's land alone's north of 10 million, and in some cases, well north of that, there's a lot at stake if you inadvertently break the rules, or somebody has an accident on your place, or a patch of native vegetation goes missing and you're made accountable for that. Like, it's you just don't want to be in that situation.
No, I think there's a lot that plays into it about coming from mindset where we spoke about first off, and then going into finding out more about the operation, and probably more so your people of where and how everyone's aligned coming into the farm, whether you've expanded, looking to expand, coming back to optimize and consolidate what you're working on. I think it's a great mix, and just probably that general conversation, quite casual, just like what we're having, to open it up for those family farmers. Younger kids have come back to the farm. The average age of that's 27, coming back to the farm, and that's probably a good stage where you've got your head sort of screwed on a bit better than when you're at your party years of hitting 21, 22, want to go to the pub every Thursday after footy training.
Yeah, nothing wrong with going to the pub after footy training. Yeah, you're right, and there's that maturity aspect, and that's what I enjoy about my role, is seeing all the different combinations and the different levels of maturity. And so what might be the right timing for one business in terms of transferring responsibility or transferring assets won't be the right time for another, because of the levels of maturity of the individuals. And you mentioned before about what each person brings to the business, and a lot of that's values based. And one exercise I think that works is understanding what I call personal operating system, or the values that drive you, and it really helps if the people in the business do a really small quick values exercise, where you might just mention a series of words and which ones of those are the most important to you. And that's where, environment might come up more for the younger generation than it did for the older generation, or family might come up more for mum in the older generation and production might come up more for those that spend more of their time out in the paddocks. And money might be more important to others, and that explains the difference in spending attitudes. And so I've found taking people through a values exercise a really useful stepping stone that pulls a few bricks out of that barrier to change.
I think just taking it back and getting it down on a piece of paper there, you look like you've got a few whiteboards behind you that you drop some notes down for work. And that's a good way as well, just to get everyone on the same playing field anyway.
Absolutely. And I'm a bit old school. I often take I buy those sheets of poster size wall charts or sticky notes, and just whack them on the wall, and let it sort of try and write down what people are saying as we're doing it, and it just makes a difference when people do see sitting up there that these are the things that we've all said are important to us, but these are the bits that we see differently. It'll be those bits that you see differently will always be the things that where the conflict comes from. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I think it's been great to touch on everything like this. I think a fair few people will get a little bit out of this, but I want to get into yourself, Kate. Actually, now that we've got a few more listeners out there on the platforms, it'd be great to get a bit of an introduction to what Think Agri is, how you became an author of a book, and where that's panned you out. So what's Think Agri, and what are you doing within agriculture?
Yeah, so Think Agri is it's my trading business. I guess, and as I mentioned before, we're on a mission to help people on farms prosper more and worry less, and also people within the supply chain. So I really focus on putting those lenses of people, production and profit across any problem that I'm asked to help people solve. And connecting the dots for them so that they can see how it's all integrated. So I'm on a mission to do that. I do that through some individual farm business work, and also work in the broader corporate farm business as well, because they have the same issues. It's just that they're not always related to each other, but they still have those same personnel issues, and they're probably under more pressure because the accountability to make money stronger for them if they're using someone else's money to run the farm. I wrote the book, and the extension from the book is a newsletter called Think Agri Real Insights. It's a subscription product, and that's what I'm really keen on developing more now. And so with that, I'm sort of writing 3 articles every 6 weeks or so, and then recording them in audio form as well as digital, because people like to listen to stuff, as you know.
Yeah.
And people can pay a subscription to get that landed in their mailbox. And I just see it's I can make a difference to individuals, really big difference to the individuals I work with, but I think I can have an even bigger impact across the industry through this service as well.
Yeah, it goes a lot further. You can only speak to one person or one family at a time, one corporate farmer at a time as well. So I think really in the world that we're into now, digital, we're all going sort of digital anyway, and it could work really well for you and anyone else out there.
Yeah. So thanks for your support, because it's something I'm quite passionate about, and I'm really enjoying this post-COVID phase, or post the worst of COVID phase, where I can get out and about again. I've been on stage a bit, doing some keynotes and running some leadership workshops with, just guest speaking at various leadership programs and that sort of thing. And I really enjoy that. I just love meeting people. And, if I can help one person listens to this and makes a tiny change in their way they operate, that makes a massive change for themselves. And that's what I'm about.
Absolutely. A couple of feel goods there in it as well for you, and also the farmer on the back end of it. It's a bit of a win-win situation. If you've taken a farmer through successfully, looking about their operation, coming back to the people within it, and also looking at themselves to see how they can improve, both personally and professionally on farm.
Oh, absolutely. And got some feedback recently of one business, and they said, look, they feel like they wouldn't be able to navigate this intergenerational stuff without having me there. I'm sure they could.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty of other people that can do what I do, but it is nice to hear that you're having an impact, and that you can see the impact in people's behavioural change. So that's pretty cool. And even for those getting just subscribe to the newsletter, getting some feedback that they sit in the tractor and they'll save up a few episodes and then listen to them when they're in the tractor, and just keeps them thinking and keeps them honest and
keeps them on the bit of a motivational loop, I feel. Rather than just going in for one-off meeting and then you're sort of accountable on your own out in the tractor. You're like, shit, I forgot to do that. I'll do that this week and get back into it. Maybe it's into the books, or seeing what parcel of land you should be looking at next, or if you should be even.
Yeah, that's right. And some of the other feedback that's been pretty cool is on the book itself.
Yeah.
And from various generations. So it's been really nice when sort of the elders of our industry, like, people in their 80s and 90s have read the book and come back and said, oh, I think you've summarised the complexities and nuances of farming really well. And, every young farmer should have this in their car, or in their ute, or in the office. That's been pretty cool. And it sort of makes me think, righto, I'm on the right track here. Just got to hopefully get the messages from the book into more ears and eyes. And we've got an audio version of the book now, so that's been the most exciting development, I guess, since you and I spoke last time.
Yeah, I think we need more books like this. When I go on Amazon, I get my books from. They don't really need a plug, but all the farming sort of books are textbooks, like versions. They're thick as anything, as wide as anything, and doesn't really come
Expensive.
down to those sort of non-fiction business type savvy management, looking at how you can improve your farm, rather than just saying this is a sheep, this is a crop. Like, they're the sort of books that are out there, and I think your book, which you actually haven't plugged it is Crops, People, Money and You. For anyone out there looking for a great read, I think it's one, especially coming from Australia. Most of the time, if we're looking for books, they've come from America or they may be English, and those farms over there are totally different.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And I guess that's why I wrote it, because I felt the same frustration all through my career when I was sort of trying to find a really good reference book. You just couldn't. They were either textbooks, as you say, and bits of those are terrific. Like I've got quite a few sitting behind me, or they were sort of lifestyle farming books. And sometimes the lifestyle farming books they're well intentioned, but they're not particularly profit focused. And I've seen, people try to adapt methods from lifestyle farming books on a broad scale, and the results financially have been fairly horrendous, and so you've got to be really careful about that. And the other source of information that I found most useful, I guess, through my consulting years was often the newsletters and insights from other consultants that not everyone had access to.
Yep.
And so one of the motivations for putting the newsletter together was, to create a relatively low cost but up to date sort of modern analysis of business and current situations.
Yeah.
So that they're the motivations behind the two products, I guess.
Yeah, and I think they work quite well into each other as well. Long burning and also sort of evergreen, which is what the Farm Survives podcast is all about. Not giving those updates of shit, 60 mils coming tomorrow, better get prepared. But in the long term, how can we better prepare for these rainfall events, that sort of way, going down to make those sort of long decisions?
Yeah. And that they're the types of things I've tried to cover. I touched on that a little bit in the book, but certainly in the newsletter, thinking 3 or 4 months ahead, saying, okay, well, we're in what I call a climate mood A year, which is Indian Ocean dipole negative and La Nina. It looks like this is going to be here for X number of months. What do you need to think about in spring? What do you need to think about at harvest? For the Horty people, how's this going to impact on the quality of your product?
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. And then just having that foresight so you can get yourself organised and get over the fear. And often, we're talking before about landscapes and being in the clouds. It's often fear that gets us in the clouds, because we don't want to think about, we think that if we think about an adverse outcome, that it might happen.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. It's just about what, Edward de Bono said, we just need to be prepared for various outcomes, and then we're organised to match that outcome.
Yeah, beautifully put. And I think people will gather a few great key takeaways in this episode, and how they'll do that, and maybe implement a few ideas into their own operation, just to make their day-to-day operation flow that little bit better. Working with the people, working with your own mindset, and going forth. I think it's a great conversation to have with yourself, but with your people on farm, whether it's family, corporate, however it works.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. That's the aim of the game. Prosper more and worry less.
Absolutely. So for yourself, what are you most excited about in the next 5 years, going on that 5-year average?
Well, personally, I suppose I'm excited about getting to that stage of life where you've got a few more choices, and probably getting a little bit more into our own personal farming. We bought a small farm a couple of years ago, 116 hectares. It's just a broadacre block, and we've got share farmers on that. I'd like to see if there's more opportunities.
You get a crop in for this year? Yeah,
absolutely. And these Mood A years for us are fantastic. So while, up your way, you're in a lot of pain, we're actually in our part of the world and across to the Wimmera, these are the years that you probably got the opportunity to produce twice as much as you normally would. So it's a bit exciting. It's our first wheat crop, so to just stand in your own wheat crop and have it rustling against your knees is pretty cool. So that's good. On an industry level, I'm really excited. I'm thinking electric vehicles. I'm thinking more automation and autonomy. I sort of feel like we're at the next big, the really big thing on Broadacre was GPS and auto steer. Like that created a lot of opportunities back. We're having these conversations 20 years ago, and most people were sort of implementing them in the mid 2000s. And then connectivity and the fact you could stand out in the field now and do a recommendation and it pings off to someone else. They were sort of the game changers. I think the next game changers will be changing the source of our energy and where autonomy and robotics might take us. So I'm really excited to see where all that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm keen to look into how everyone sort of establishes their own smart farm, whether that smart farm definition changes for a lot of farmers, as it will, how much they take on board. But believe it or not, we actually got auto steer for the first time as stockies this year, and we couldn't get a crop in. I was devastated.
Yeah, that's right. That's that's of
all the years we picked it. But hopefully it can dry out. We'll put some millet or something coming up into summer for fodder as well. So it should all pan out hopefully, but we just need to dry out a little bit. A few more sunny days, not less rainy days, but just more sun. I think we need. The way you word it makes all the matter.
Yes, I think you're right there, and I think in livestock, when I'm talking about automation and robotics, I think we've underinvested in livestock infrastructure.
Yeah, it is lacking behind. I feel behind cropping, broadacre, horticulture, and everything like that.
Yeah, I think it looks like the stuff's there. Like they're really well set up farms. They've got those elevated sort of races that push the livestock along, and they'll just make anything that makes work easier. Yeah, to me is a no-brainer. And if you can go to the sheep yards and don't have to say the F-bomb as much, that's got to be good on everybody. Yeah, absolutely. We used to drench our sheep in the race, bashing our knees. We've got Dorpers, so they bash your knees pretty well. And now we've got a hydraulic lift, and some may look at it as a bit slower, but overall, across the year, it's so much quicker, and you're not bashed up after the day. And you can go straight back into drenching for the next day or go do your own activities, whatever it may be, a little less sore as well. Yeah, that's right. That manual sheep is so even in the farming businesses that I'm involved in, where 80% of the income might come from cropping, that 20% of income that comes from sheep and the risk management benefits they bring, is so important, and it makes sense to make it easier to work with and more enjoyable. Yeah, 100%. And especially the younger ones coming back now are probably wanting to bring these ideas in, and that the older farmers, both male and female, are probably, shit, we should have had this 10 years ago. Yeah. And there's and I guess that's the other thing I'm excited about, is seeing more women playing an active role in the business. Like there's a lot more young women coming home onto farms. I think we've still got a long way to go on that in terms of how we socialise our kids and enthuse them. Give the little boys a tractor and the little girl gets a doll. Well, what if the little girl wants to go out and have a look at the farm as well? So we've still got a long way to go in terms of being open-minded about the possibilities for farming when it comes to gender, but there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, 100%. Even George the Farmer, will give them a plug. I met her the other day, the author. George the Farmer, and I think they brought in Ava the Farmer as well. So now they've got both. So there's opportunities out there for everyone within agriculture.
Yeah, that's good. I'm pleased. I hadn't met Ava the Farmer before, so I'm pleased to know
I'll have to look that up, what it is. It may not be Ava, but there is a female,
Yeah,
a girl
cool.
version coming out currently anyway. Well, Kate,
that's cool.
It's been amazing to sit down. We could talk forever about mindset,
Yeah, we
farming,
could, Jack.
and how you can benefit each other out there. But your work that you're doing at Think Agri, your book there, Crops, People, Money, and You being the farmer at the other end of this podcast, and how that sort of will help your operation, or just even use it as motivation to move forward. How can people contact yourself at Think Agri if they're looking to book a meeting, or if they want to talk a little bit about the book even?
Yeah, so the easiest way to do that is just jump on the website, thinkagri.com.au, and there's a page where you can make contact, or you can grab my phone number off the website. And there's also on that website, there's the opportunity to direct purchase the book, and also go to the all the usual platforms for the audio book, Amazon, Audible, etc. And all those directions are on the website. And for Think Agri Real Insights or TARI, again on the website, there's a registration space or a space there for people they can get a sample and have a look. And you can also download a sample of the book from the website as well.
Yeah.
So that's that's the best way to get hold of me, or keep an eye out on socials. Usually pretty active on Twitter mainly.
Yeah, Twitter's a good one, and ever growing for farmers for ideas and everything like that.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess, love everyone out there to stay inspired, choose to be inspired rather than intimidated, and have a happy farming life.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of topics that we can cover off. We'll have to get them on the next episodes with yourself, Kate, Dr. Kate Burke. Thank you very much for joining me into the virtual studio.
Thanks, Jack. I really appreciate your support and the opportunity to have a chat. You're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Farms Advice podcast. It is produced by AdvertRise Digital, the agribusiness marketing specialist. Go to farmsadvice.com.au for more information on this episode and the others before, and spread the farm's advice. If you love this episode, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe, as it helps other farmers find us too. But until then, next Tuesday, keep on farming. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Farms Advice podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.